All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the April Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about SharePoint and how to sell and unsell it to the rest of your organization. Today we begin our three-part series on using SharePoint as an online document management solution. Be sure to join us next month as we continue this series with a broadcast on how to plan an effective SharePoint implementation. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the President and CEO of Community IT, and I'm also the moderator for our webinar series. Before we begin today, we'd like to share a few webinar tips with you. Most importantly, we encourage you to interact with us by asking questions via the GoToWebinar chat feature. We'd also like to remind you to avoid multitasking during the webinar. You may just miss the best part. If you do miss the best part or need to leave the webinar early, we will be posting links to the recording and slides on our website, YouTube channel, and SlideShare account. In case you're not familiar with Community IT, our skilled and certified team of IT professionals serves the greater Washington nonprofit community, helping organizations of all sizes and capacities to advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We're deeply invested in the nonprofit community, having served over 900 nonprofits since 1993, and we take a strategic and collaborative approach that fits the unique needs and culture of nonprofit organizations. And now it's my great pleasure to turn this over to today's presenters, Johanny Torrico and Steve Longenecker, and I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves.
Go for it, Steve.
So I'm Steve Longenecker. I'm happy to be with you all today. Johanny and I have been working on the SharePoint practice working group, as I think we call it, for, I don't know, it feels like about a year now. It's been a pleasure to work with Johanny, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of the things that we've learned.
Yep, and I am Johanny, the VP of Ops for Community IT, and as Steve mentioned, these days we're very focused on SharePoint Online and exploring the best approach to implementation so that SharePoint, brings the most out of its technology to organizations like you all fun stuff. So today, Steve and I will walk you through the benefits and also challenges of SharePoint online mainly. We're talking and focusing only on SharePoint Online today. And we will follow then with a demo that will showcase some of the benefits and also the challenges. So let's start with the benefits of SharePoint. Probably most of you already have heard about SharePoint. So what is SharePoint? SharePoint is basically a Microsoft web application. It's included with Office 365. And it's not only a cloud management solution, but it also integrates content, and it also has some intranet capabilities. So it's very complex. So there are a lot of benefits of SharePoint, and I'm just going to mention quickly some of those. We're going to move slide by slide, but I'll mention some of those here. So it integrates with Office, and it has a very, very tight integration, and that actually helps a lot with the user transition and adoption. It makes that very, very much easier. It has great searching capabilities, and it's actually far, far better than those search capabilities of a regular file server. There's version control, there's no more version 1, 2, final, and all of those things, record management, etc. But most importantly, I think SharePoint is designed for the enterprise, unlike other solutions out there. You can central manage your users and permissions, which means basically that you have groups just like on your file server, different groups with users, so you can actually central manage that, and it's much easier to manage. But you can also have the ability to assign granular permissions to specific files or folders. In addition to that, actually, SharePoint has actually improved a lot in reporting. So you have native CAN reports that you can run and get some security auditing and logging. and some more reports on usage as well. So that has been actually a big improvement lately. Also, Microsoft Office 365, SharePoint, and Exchange as well. In general, it complies with industry standard regulations. So, HIPAA, FISMA, PCI Level 1, all of those regulatory requirements. So that's also there if you were concerned about compliance. And lastly, the uptime is much greater than the one you'll get with your file server. I mean, Microsoft has invested a lot on their equipment. It has state-of-the-art equipment, geo-redundancy, and they have invested a lot of money. I mean, much more money, far more money than any of us will be able to ever invest in our infrastructure. So those kind of, they are designed for the enterprise. They're here to stay. So that's kind of one of the big, huge benefits of SharePoint. Another benefit is remote access. SharePoint Online lives in the cloud, obviously. Oh yeah, by the way, this is a tip. So plan for redundancy. You need a redundant internet connection, and a very strong one, before you actually move forward with your migration. So, because you will rely on that a lot. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, since your content is in the cloud, you can access it from anywhere with any device, tablets, laptops. You can access it from your office, from your home, from the metro, from the car, from anywhere. So no more trying to connect to that slow remote server to access your files. So that's past, and so that's kind of one of the huge benefits. Another one is that when your files are on-prem, it's very hard. You have to use email, send an attachment to kind of an external partner, then they will make edits, then they'll send it to you, and it's anyway, it's a lot of back and forth. So with having your files in the cloud, actually with SharePoint, it allows you for external partners for you to share the content with external partners, and in a very secure ways. So you can create a link, for example, with anonymous access, and that means that it's a guest access. So you send that link, and your partner or will just click on the link and will open it without even authenticated. And you can put an expiration date. You can say, well, expire, just keep it open for 1 day, 1 week, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever you feel like you want. So that's very good. If you want more secure, you can also actually send a link by authenticated access, which actually will require your user to sign in with a Microsoft Live ID, mainly Outlook.com, and they can use their Gmail address or any email address to sign in for Microsoft Live ID account if they don't have one, and then they will just get a link to confirm their email address, and they will be able to open that document like that. You can actually grant view access if read only, if that's what you want. But if you want them to collaborate and edit, you can also do that. So it's either read or allowed editing. So those are two, and then Steve will continue talking about the extra benefits of SharePoint.
So another benefit of SharePoint that Johanny alluded to at the beginning is findability and discoverability. SharePoint is a different paradigm than a file server, and this is actually also one of the challenges of SharePoint. So it cuts both ways. But once people are in that new paradigm and comfortable with it and using it, I think that the findability and discoverability of documents is superior than what you would get in a file server. So we're going to demo this at the end of the after the slideshow is over. We'll have some time for demos, and our theory there is that demos, we never know for sure if they're going to work or not. We'll just do the slideshow first, and then we'll do all the demos at once. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you can see here in this is a library, and libraries, they don't they don't stress folders. Folders are the file server way of organizing files and helping you have information about what files are because of what folders they're in or what folder hierarchy they're in. SharePoint libraries are much flatter. You might have instead of 8 levels of folders where you know that what this document is because it's in the 2016 folder, inside the budgets folder, inside the youth work folder. And so that already I know that without even reading the name, that this Excel spreadsheet must have something to do with 2016 budgeting for the youth work program. It's much flatter in a SharePoint library, so all of the files that might be in a whole root structure of folders would be flat together in one place. But then there's metadata attached to those files, and here we have a screenshot of one that's obscured by our demo stamp. But right here, some things are going on. The client ID is obscured. This is an actual screenshot from the project library that I manage. But each of these document sets has a client ID associated with them, and that's very quick way for me to get the documents. It ends up being the most important way for me to get to the documents I want to, because I think about which client they're associated with. I also have a project type metadata associated with these projects, and the project status you can see there on the far right. This particular view, and if you see there in the middle where it says, right below the plus and the new there is the highlighted active. I could also click on the link next to it and see all the proposal evaluation projects that we have going on right now. Or if I click on the all, I'll obviously get everything. There's another way of filtering, which is over here on the left, called key filters, and we'll demo that later. This is great if once you get used to the metadata system. Another thing that's really pretty terrific is the advanced search that can be customized. So it's not just advanced search, which you'd probably expect, but that it can be customized as well. So there is no out-of-the-box metadata field called client ID in SharePoint. There's lots of different ones that come out of the box. Date modified comes out of the box. Author comes out of the box, but not client ID. That's a community IT metadata that we added, but then we also added it to our customized advanced search. So now, if I'm looking for the words network assessment in a document and I know what client I'm looking that for, I will turn up all of the network assessments associated with that particular client ID. And what's powerful about advanced search, the other things that I showed you on the screenshot before was sort of a single library. So think of it as a single root folder. In this case, it was the project library. The advanced search can cross all the libraries that you have. So in this case, this network assessment's not a project. The network assessment's in the network manager's library, but I turned it up with my advanced search, and that's great for me because I can, again, with relative ease, because we use metadata, I can like zero in on what I want and get it to show up quickly. Johanna wanted me to talk about this because I'm much more the cheerleader for this. I feel like all that metadata and stuff might not even matter in 3 to 5 years, depending on the pace of change with technology, and it always surprises me how fast technology changes, and I've been in the field for a long time now. But Delve is a separate, I guess, piece of the Office 365 suite of services, but it is included with the Office 365, just like email and Skype for Business and OneDrive for Business and SharePoint, or Sites, I guess it's actually formally called in Office 365. SharePoint Online is officially by Microsoft called Sites, but almost everyone I know calls it SharePoint Online. Delve is a separate service, but what Delve basically does is it's in the back end of the cloud, I guess. Microsoft has all these servers that are processing all this information that's associated with Office 365, and somehow they use machine learning and big data to sort of track who am I emailing with the most? So you look at there on the left where it says people, I'm obviously at the top of the list, but then these are people that apparently I email with a lot. I did not formulate that list. It's based probably on my my Skype for Business activity, my email activity, and so forth. I could probably, weight the scales by putting some stuff into my Delve, profile, but I haven't done much of that. It just kind of knows what's going on by my behavior, and then it surfaces all these documents that are in Office 365. They might have been emailed to me as attachments because that's Office 365 email. They could have been saved to someone else's OneDrive and shared with me. I can't see anything that I don't have permission to. So if Johan, who's obviously at the top of this list of people besides myself, saves something to OneDrive but doesn't share it with me, I won't be able to see it because that's his personal space. But if he shared it with me, even if he shared it with me, 2 months ago, it could show up in Delve. If it was 2 months ago, it might not show up in Delve. Somehow the machine is trying to figure out constantly what probably is most important going on. I may have spent too much time talking about it, but it is kind of like an up-and-coming service that is in the background that may make some of the other stuff that Johanna and I are going to be talking about today in terms of trying to organize your documents in a SharePoint library less and less interesting to, the youngsters coming up, because they'll just rely on this kind of crazy artificial intelligence that just show them what documents are important to them right then. It sounds insane. I thought it was insane when I first heard about it at the Ignite conference last year. I often go there and find the documents I need. That's the end of that.
Good. All right. So we also wanted to show talk about the integration and the tight integration with Microsoft Office. So this screenshot shows you an example of that. You can see actually the different locations. You see the sites, the OneDrive for Business and the personal, and then it remembers any recent folders that you have opened. So it makes it easier when you want to, save something, you just go there and save it on that folder, or if you want to open something, you just open Word or Excel, navigate to that folder and open that document. And the important thing is that you're actually navigated to saving straight to the cloud and going to grab the document from the cloud. This is actually not relying on syncing or local syncing, like Dropbox, for example. And that's very important because relying on syncing and trying to rely on local syncing can be very problematic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, this is Microsoft Office with Windows. Now, when it comes to Macs, the Office 2016, actually, it's very, 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 the look is very much the same as the Windows application. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is also that Microsoft actually released a OneDrive for Business for Macs that is very stable. I'm actually using it right now. I use a Mac with Office 2016 and OneDrive for Business, and it works great. So if you're embarking on a journey to SharePoint Online, I definitely suggest actually you move your users to Office 2016, 2013 or more. But if you have Mac users, move them to Office 2016 because that's gonna be very, very beneficial and actually increase user adoption. Now the navigation, the other thing also that it's actually great with Office 2016 and Macs is that unlike Windows, whenever you save a document to a library directly to the cloud, it will actually pop up a window asking you for your metadata. And when you're doing that in Windows, you actually have to go to the document properties. It's a process that is very confusing and convoluted on a Windows machine. So this is a plus for Mac users, and I wanted to mention that. We also kind of gonna demonstrate the Windows side later on while Steve is doing the demo. So that's it for Microsoft Office. Now, another thing that I wanted to show was OneNote. So OneNote has been out for a while, and I always tried to use it, but it was locally, it was not very beneficial. But once I was able to actually have it in my OneDrive and on a document library, and I was able to access it from anywhere, from my phone, from my iPad. It was great. And for those of you that are not familiar with OneNote, OneNote is kind of having a notebook and asteroids, and an electronic copy of your notebook. It's a great platform for free information gathering and collaboration. And like I mentioned, it has a mobile app, and it's great because you can work on it, take notes anywhere you are. Great for brainstorming. So that's it for OneNote. And then Office Online, again, it's also included with Office 365, and it's another nice thing to have. Microsoft always keeps improving it. It's great for co-editing. It's real-time co-editing whenever you're using Office Online, and Steve is also working on something. I can actually see his changes real-time, and we work a lot on SharePoint documents, so that's great. And it's also great for external sharing. So you can send a link, and even if somebody out there doesn't have Office, they can still view it, even though they don't have a license. So that's great. It does have some limitation though. So if you want to do things like heavy formatting and add headers and stuff like that, those things are not yet possible. So that's it. Steve, you want to show us some stuff about co-editing and versioning?
Yeah, so Johnny talked about the co-authoring, and this is an important, Johnny talked briefly about the sort of the limitations of syncing locally, which is sort of the Dropbox model, but all of the cloud file services that sort of get a lot of attention are sort of considered, the significant competitors for our clients' attention. Dropbox for Business and Box come to mind. All of them have the ability to sync a local copy. Actually, it is a limitation of Macs that Macs can't, I think this is correct, Johanny, correct me if I'm wrong, but Macs can't sync a local copy of a SharePoint library. They can sync a local copy of the OneDrive for Business, which is like a personal library, but you can't sync a collaborative SharePoint library. Windows can. However, in our experience and our strong recommendation for best practices to not sync locally, there are a lot of reasons. The most clear one to me is that the sync eventually breaks. Like it works well until it doesn't, and then it doesn't break all the time, but when it doesn't, that immediately causes issues. But there are other obvious problems. Anytime that people are collaborating, and which is one of the reasons that it works fine with OneDrive for Business, where it's your own personal space, is that with a library that is a collaborative space, if multiple people are working on files and they work on the same file, but they're both working off of a local synced copy, there can be issues. But co-authoring is another reason to use the cloud. It's great that you can work on the document literally at the same time. You don't get that little pop-up that says someone else has this document open, do you want to open a read-only copy? No, in fact, it just opens for you, and you can do this in the Word Online or Excel Online or PowerPoint Online that we just alluded to, the online version of the Office suite. But you can actually open it in the full-fledged software that runs on your machine. So Mac or Windows, if Johanny and I both have this PowerPoint open and it's saved not to a network share on our file server or to one of our local drives, but to a SharePoint library, she can be working on it, editing it in PowerPoint, and I can be editing it in PowerPoint, and they are both happening at the same time. So it's very cool. You can do all the other things. You can check things in and check things out, and sort of reserve that document for yourself if you don't want anybody else using. But it's pretty cool. I should add just a little bit about the experience. Johanny mentioned that when you're in the online version, you can actually sort of see the changes in real time, and that's like so more like what you experience with Google Docs. You can almost sort of see cursors move around. With the desktop suite, when you're running it on the software, it's sort of asynchronous. You're still working on the document at the same time somebody else is. But when I save it, basically my version of Word or Excel or whatever, Word, uploads my changes to the cloud and downloads anybody else's changes to the cloud. And when my collaborator saves their version of the document, they upload their changes and download my changes. And so I sort of get in the habit when I'm working on a document like this, which I do with some frequency, to sort of save pretty often. I'm hitting Control S on my Windows laptop. I'm hitting it, you know, every 3 minutes or so, because I want to see what other people's changes are and want them to see my changes pretty quickly. So another thing, and we'll demo this, is just versioning. So for now, we're just going to say, hey, it's great that SharePoint has versioning. I left the slide in, even though a demo is coming, just because I like the slide. I stole this idea. I refashioned it completely so that I wouldn't be violating any copyright rules, but I stole this idea for this slide from someone at Ignite last year that gave a nice presentation on this. But we've all seen this clutter in our file servers where, you know, you don't want to lose if you're modifying a file and you made edits or something, you don't necessarily know for sure whether your version is going to be the version that everyone agrees to. So you save it with, you know, a v something or whatever, and I mean, I've seen, you know, final, you know, before, because it turns out after it was everybody thought it was done, they decided that the final version wasn't the final version, and so there's a final version and so on. Instead, everything gets sort of wrapped up, and SharePoint takes care of all that for us, and it's a lot better. You can still take this, in this example, the file server reorg proposal, you can, in SharePoint, in the browser window that's exposing the SharePoint library to you, you can, you know, click on it and see previous versions and roll back if you want to, and all of that. So it's all still there, but you don't have all the clutter, and that's nice.
Yep, that's great. And lastly, SharePoint is more than a file sharing solution. SharePoint actually offers different out-of-the-box web parts, such as, you know, you can add a calendar, you can add a task list, you can add, other than document libraries, you can add Twitter feeds, announcements, wiki, contact lists, etc. They have a whole list of web parts that are very helpful, that can actually be easily integrated in. Often, though, I want to mention, you know, people ask us, you know, can SharePoint be used as an intranet? And SharePoint has a lot of tools out of the box, like the ones I just mentioned. And you can put something together without a lot of effort and kind of mirror a basic intranet. But it's not very pretty. And in our experience, when you have an intranet, you want to be sure that it's kind of sexy, so that, you know, your users go to that site and they want to come back. And if you have a basic design and the layout is very basic, it won't happen. And so if you want to use SharePoint for an intranet, you will have to engage into more of a costly design and customization to get there. Right, Steve? Is that about right?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that, like, these web parts can be valuable if your ambitions for this quote-unquote intranet aren't that great. So let's say that you have a library that's for your communications team, and the communications team is, you know, you've talked about it, and it's like, yeah, it would be great to have a shared library that's just for the communications folks, and maybe a task list also. Can you throw that together for us? And it's very, very easy to do that in SharePoint, and it's totally functional and works fine. You know, almost everything here is SharePoint out of the box. It's the theme is probably out of the box also. It's just if you want, like, an intranet that you know is like the backbone for the entire organization that you have, I guess it just depends on the level of ambition that you have for that. The functionality can be there for sure, but sort of some of the look and feel of a really high-end intranet is probably the SharePoint can definitely be the back end for it, but again, your out of the box look and feel of SharePoint is kind of, there's a certain formula that you start to recognize if you worked with SharePoint a lot, and yes, if you get, like, design people, they can get in there and sort of code on top of it.
Yeah, and actually this is a great segue for our next or second part of our webinar, the SharePoint Challenges. So Steve, why don't you walk us through some of those?
So yeah, this whole presentation or webinar, I guess, was presented as unselling SharePoint, and all we've been doing so far is selling SharePoint. So some additional explanation is probably appropriate at this point. We do really believe that SharePoint's a great tool and a great way to collaborate on documents. So we don't really unsell SharePoint, really. At the same time, we have had successful implementations successful in the sense of the technical I's were dotted and T's were crossed, and we did everything we meant to do, but it wasn't received well by the organization or by parts of the organization, and if it's by like the organization's leadership, that can end up being very problematic. So we have now taken it upon ourselves, whenever we're doing a sort of a SharePoint implementation or a SharePoint implementation sales thing, to then, you know, we definitely put the benefits first, and we definitely try to get people excited about the benefits, but then we have a whole section here called SharePoint Challenges, and we don't want to undersell those. We think the benefits outweigh the costs, but they may not in every case, and if they're not going to, we'd rather find that out at the beginning. So challenge number one, it's a biggie. There is no more Windows Explorer or Finder for your shared documents. If you're going to save things to a SharePoint library, we don't believe in local sync. We don't think it's reliable enough, and we know that it leads to version conflicts. And you know, eventually you're going to have help desk tickets where you're like, I can't. My local sync has this red exclamation mark. Something's wrong with it. Can you help? And it's not necessarily that big a deal to fix. But I'm an IT person. I had local sync set up for the projects library for quite a while, and I felt like every 3 to 4 weeks I was having to do what's called resyncing, where there's a whole purging process and everything. It doesn't take that long, but it just felt like, you know, why am I doing this? Let's just use the cloud directly. So you need to access files directly through either the desktop Office suite, which like Word or Excel. We had that screenshot before, where Office 2016 for both Windows and Mac does this very well with Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. Office 2013 does it very well, not as well, but pretty well for Windows. I think for Mac people that it really does need I guess the previous version was Office 2011 and didn't really have this stuff baked into it. But desktop suite, you can access the cloud directly. So if you click on that sites link in Word, and there's actually something in your sites because you've had a SharePoint implementation, you're saving and opening directly from Word or Excel or whatever. Or you're using an internet browser, and I'd say that Microsoft has really changed its tune now about how much they want to sort of lock people into the Microsoft stack entirely, at least as far as browsers are concerned. There's one or two functions that aren't used hardly ever. I haven't used it, the function I'm thinking of, which is sort of, it's called Open in Explorer or something like that, and on a Windows machine you can do it. It only works in Internet Explorer. I haven't used it in like 6 to 8 weeks, and I'm doing SharePoint all the time, and including SharePoint development, sort of. I mean, I'm giving myself too much credit when I call it SharePoint development, but I'm doing stuff on the back end of SharePoint. I use Chrome all the time, and it works great. But it's a very different experience to access files using a browser. And then because you're using a browser, you really can't use folders very well. We do implement folders in our SharePoint projects sometimes at the root level, so you might have one layer of folders, and that can be effective for reasons that are probably outside of the scope of this presentation. But in general, if you're in a browser and the source of your files that you're browsing are somewhere else, not down the hall, you know, on a gigabit LAN network, but out on the internet somewhere, and you're dealing with internet slowness if routers are slow or whatever. Folders are too slow. Imagine, if you will, that you're you're at your file server and you're at the root of your file server and you're double clicking on, you know, finance, and then right away it exposes, you go into that folder, and in finance there's like budgets and accounts receivable and all these subfolders, and you want budgets, so you double click on budgets, and right away it opens up, you know, the budgets for the different program areas, and there's 8 or 10 different folders in that, and you double click on, you know, the youth programs, and then that opens up the different years, and you double click on 2016, and then you get to the files that you want. On a file server, that the file server is local, that process does not take that long, and your users are used to it, and it actually is not, it's perfectly effective. Imagine though if that was happening in a browser, and each time you clicked, the little browser wheel spun, and it took not that long, a couple seconds, but a couple seconds each layer, it starts to get painful and it just doesn't work. So instead, we're using metadata. So all of the files are in the same single sort of flat structure, but they're sorted and filtered and searched for using metadata, which is data about the documents. And you can customize this, and there's a lot of design work that goes into customizing it appropriately, but you would basically be, you know, clicking on the finance library, and then you'd be using the metadata of budget and a different metadata that has to do with year, and the year you'd pick the 26, anyway, and it all comes out and it works well, but it's different, and we'll show you in the demo that there's more friction up front to that, because saving a file into a folder is just a sort of a one-click thing once you get to the right folder, and we've already sort of talked about how getting to the right folder is pretty quick when it's all local. You have to sort of add that metadata to your document when you save it, and that takes time. So there needs to be some buy-in from your organization. The organization sort of generally has to believe that this friction that's up front needs to be worth it. We'd argue that it is, but it's something that, you know, you need to get buy-in from everyone for. We already mentioned the fact that Mac users can't do local sync of SharePoint libraries, that they can do OneDrive for Business, but they can't do the SharePoint libraries. Wait, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. I apologize. I'm going to demo this, but so I have very deliberately always mentioned when I talk about how the desktop suite of Office has these like save as or open from, you know, links directly into the SharePoint cloud. So if you save a word in a new file in Word for the first time, Sites or OneDrive for Business are right there available for you. With Outlook, and I will show you this, Sites is not there. And it's one of those strange things. I feel like it's probably a case of an example of Microsoft's sort of siloing in their development. I've always sort of felt like Outlook is kind of an outlier. They must have a different product manager or something, because it feels like, you know, Outlook 2018 or Office 2018 or Office 2019, whenever the next big version comes out, maybe a service pack will fix it. But at this point, Outlook is not caught up with Word and PowerPoint and Excel and the other members of the Office suite. It does not have the site, so it's actually painful to save things from Outlook to SharePoint. The good news is that I don't think people are doing that all day long. I mean, I hope not. But if your job is to save attachments from Outlook all day long, you're going to hate SharePoint and probably want to quit your job. But, you know, again, hopefully it's something that you do once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, and in that case, spending an extra 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes on that process, if you can also, at the same time, you can say, yes, this is kind of stupid, but SharePoint's giving me all this great stuff like remote access and sharing external links with my partners and all that, then this is such a small thing. At the same time, if we hid this from our clients until after the implementation, and then someone decides they didn't like SharePoint anyway for other reasons, this is the kind of thing that ends up, you know, people get focused on. All these clicks when I save a document from Outlook to SharePoint, I hate it.
Yep, and
this is where I was ahead of you. So.
Yeah, and like Steve mentioned earlier, you know, we talk about local syncing, and I'm a Mac user, and I have SharePoint libraries. I use the cloud all the time, and even though I have OneDrive for Business, I sync my OneDrive. It's fairly small, but SharePoint document libraries cannot be synced using the OneDrive for Business. Anyway, so that's not possible, and like I mentioned, we recommend against local sync of SharePoint libraries. Anyways, and there's a few reasons for that I want to actually mention too. Is there's a limit on the number of items that can be locally synced, so that is very problematic. So that thing is something to keep in mind. Also, you need to keep in mind your hard drive space. You know, if you sync libraries, or you want to sync libraries to your Windows, for example. I know that we're on the Mac OS here, but just in general, you need to make sure that you have enough hard drive space, because that's going to be syncing locally. So you need that. There's also kind of a file size limit for syncing your files. So if you have a large file, it will break the sync, and that's problematic. That's what causes problems. There's also a long list of invalid characters that will break your sync. So if you have that exclamation mark and you try to sync your library, it's going to break the sync. And the problem is that it's not very intuitive. It's not going to tell you the sync is broken, and you realize it might be 2 weeks, 3 weeks before actually you realize that you haven't synced, and you have to manually sync, or you have to kind of investigate it, what is breaking the sync, and fix those little issues. So that's why we recommend against syncing. Right, Steve? All right.
Correct. Okay, so I'm going to show this also, and I'm aware that we're getting to the point of the schedule where we definitely wanted to be into the demo, so I'm going to get to that soon. But suffice it to say that like I'm thinking of Word, for example, but there are obviously templates in most of the different parts of the Office desktop suite. But in Word, you can, if you click on the New, you get presented with a bunch of templates, and there's a group of stock templates that comes with Word that Microsoft's done. That's this screenshot actually is not from Microsoft. It's from the web. I just grabbed it because it was free, public domains screenshot. But you have that form letter, different things. But then you can also customize, and maybe some of you guys have customized some templates that are on your file server, or people copy to their local hard drives, so that when they launch Word and click on the New button, they might be able to bring up like a template for your organization's letterhead. We do that at Community IT. We have templates for contracts and so forth and so on. The problem is that right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that will be designed out of the next version of the Office Desktop Suite, the Desktop Office Suite can only sort of use template files that are local. So it can't, but at the same time, you're trying to move to SharePoint, so you want your templates to be in SharePoint. So you have your templates in SharePoint, which makes sense because that's what you use, but then Word can't really access those templates directly. So there's extra clicks, and again, we're back to what I was, my sad excuse for it, but it's true. It's not where it needs to be, where the technology will eventually get, I'm sure. It's not there yet, and so there's certain processes that are painful. Painful in the sense that it takes extra minutes, not extra hours. But people like things to be painless as much as possible, and every little friction, particularly if it's a new solution that is taking some getting used to anyway, can hurt your effort. And so, sort of admitting this stuff up front, we think is the best approach. So yeah, I'll demo this, and you'll see what I mean, and you'll say, you're right, Steve. That's pretty awful, but it's what we have to do.
Yep, and this is kind of our last 2 slides before the demo, which is exciting. SharePoint is a great solution, and if implemented well, will actually carry many benefits. Time savings, and you can search quickly for the stuff that you want. Stuff will surface with that Delve thing. You can access it anywhere, mobility, improved collaboration, etc., etc. But it is a big undertaking. it requires a lot of time from your stakeholders, and it requires leadership buy-in. So let's look at the next steps. Go ahead, Steve. You can forward that. So besides the technical requirements, bandwidth, internet redundancy, and the version of Office you use, you actually need to understand how SharePoint fits into the broader strategic technology objectives of the organization. Because honestly, for SharePoint to be successful, you actually need to be kind of looking at solving a specific problem or improve kind of a specific business process or processes. Because really SharePoint requires a very high level of engagement at the leadership level. So you need to, find who are the key stakeholders are, and are they likely to be engaged, or they're just too busy, because it requires a lot of time. I would suggest that you will need to kind of evaluate SharePoint first, and answer different questions such as, what is the organization trying to accomplish? Are you just moving files? You just want to move files to the cloud, or are you kind of trying to create greater efficiency because you're emailing attachments all the time, and you have to save, and you need versioning because you have 100 different versions of one document that can be very efficient for you to just have SharePoint and establish the versioning. Are there existing organizational functions that maybe SharePoint can help automating, like the ones that I just mentioned? Is your organization just looking for some simple or basic document management solution, or are you looking more of an intranet portal, something like that, functionality? Do you have any compliance requirements? I mean, there are a lot of things there that you kind of need to think through and evaluate first. And this will help you to get buy-in. And actually, let me give you some tips to get buy-in early on. As I mentioned, you want to make sure you evaluate SharePoint as a solution. Don't jump to conclusions, because maybe SharePoint is not the right solution for your organization. Maybe there's something else out there that doesn't require that that time commitment, and that you probably don't that you don't have, or you might not have. So I would say also showcase the benefits. If you understand the problem and you feel that SharePoint can it's the right solution, and it can bring a lot of benefits, show those benefits, but don't actually hide the challenges, because there are a few. Steve have shown some of those. So make sure you put that up front. Show those challenges to your leadership, and then that will actually help them evaluate if the gains outweigh the challenges. And another tip: involve your users early on. Make sure there is enough time to get them involved, and they are more likely to actually adopt SharePoint as a solution if they are invested in building it. So make sure involve them in those early meetings when you're actually, if SharePoint is the right solution, if you are actually reviewing your content to develop metadata, you need their feedback. And like I mentioned, if they are invested in the process, they will be more likely prompt to use SharePoint as a solution. Educate them along the way. Empower them to do some basic things in SharePoint that are other than uploading files or saving files to their libraries. Maybe they can create their own views. There are a lot of things there that you can actually empower your users to do that will help with investing them in the process. So yeah, I mean, SharePoint is great. I'm a big fan. I think we're a big fan of SharePoint, but it's also a big undertake. So make sure you evaluate it. Start small with a pilot, and be sure you have time to invest, enough time to invest on it. So Steve, and do you have anything to add, or are we ready for the demo?
No, you covered it all, and the next slide says demos on it. But let me just do a check with Johan. Johan, we're at 10 till, and I know people start to drop off. Should we flip to the next slide to show what's coming up next, and then go back to the demos? Would that make sense? How do you want to handle that?
Sure. Yeah, we can just knock that out and then spend the rest of the time on the demos.
Okay.
And then we typically go after answering questions. There have been a lot of questions, and we'll do our best to get to them. And if we happen to not answer your question, feel free to send a follow-up email. We'd be happy to follow up with you more. But we are, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is part of a 3-part series on SharePoint and using SharePoint as an online document management solution. And so part 2 will be next month on May 19th, 4 o'clock. Johanny will be back, and this time joined by Abdul Musa, one of our senior consultants, and they're going to review some tips for successful SharePoint implementation. And they're going to share a methodology that we've developed over the last 18 months or so that we've found to be very effective. So we hope you join us next month for that webinar.
All right, so thank you. So yes, the next stage here is to demonstrate some of the things that we alluded to in the presentation. So I am a little nervous about demos, so we'll see how it goes, but I'm going to click end the slideshow. So that disappeared that. And can one of you guys, Johanny or Johan, confirm that you can see the demo library? Great.
Good to go. Okay.
All right, so first of all, this is a library we put together just last night and a lot of these documents, the names are not actually indicative of what's actually in there. Some of the things that are in there are just empty, empty content or gibberish and so on, because that may not be. But you can see over here, all of them have been modified relatively recently. Actually, I think that's not possible. So I'm going to refresh my screen. And they were modified about an hour ago. Yes. Okay. So so first of all, I want to just show these different views I talked about. So this is showing all the documents. This is ostensibly a proposals library of some sort, maybe. Anyway, we have this status called a column called status, and you can see the different kinds of statuses that we have there. So if I just wanted, this is the default view is the all documents, but you can customize view. If you click on these 3 dots, I can create a view there, and this is something that I do not have to be a SharePoint administrator to do. Anybody can do, and this is what Johanny mentioned is in terms of like early on empowering users to start liking SharePoint is to sort of give them, training on some of these things early on, because that maybe that just like people like to change the desktop background of their Windows computer to be a picture of their kids or something like that, just makes them more comfortable with their computer. It gives them some ownership, and so having your own view isn't quite as good as having a picture of your kids on your desktop, unless you name the view after your kids or something. But anyway, this view called draft is the filters just for these documents that have the status draft in them. Also, by the way, this view is sorted by the name. The last view, the all documents, is sorted by the modified time. This view also has I don't want to make things highlighted too much, has more columns. It has who is modified by, it has something called a year. So there's you can adjust what columns show up, and you can control that for real estate purposes. I was going to show the modify view, but I'm not going to, in the interest of time. But I can control all these things. It's very straightforward how you do that. The key filter, I'm going to go back to the all documents view. By the way, each of these views has its own URL, and so you can actually, like, I can bookmark different views, and I do that. And so I have a bookmark for my proposals evaluation view of my projects library, and I have one for my active view. And that way, when I quickly want to go to one or the other, I can just use my bookmarks, my Chrome bookmarks, which I've hidden for the purposes of demonstrations here, but they're usually right up here in my bookmarks bar. Anyway, there's also the ability to use filters, and this is something that it's pretty easy to build. It's not stock, but we can add it very easily. So we have these themes, and again, we kind of made this up. It doesn't make sense that there's something called Northwind Traders Project Analysis that's funded by the Gates Foundation, and it's about education. I mean, these don't match. We accept that this is not the cleanest demo, but it doesn't have any client information in it, and so that's helpful. So if I want to sort by let's say education, or filter for education. I start typing. If you have lots and lots of terms in a particular metadata field, this autocomplete can be handy because you just start typing and then you get right away the choices that you want. So I'm going to look for education. I apply education, and my wheels spin for a second, and then I just have the documents that have the education theme. Now, some metadata we have made exclusively that it has to be one or the other. It has to have a unique value. So status cannot be both won and lost. It cannot be draft and in review. It has to be one thing. So if you change the status from if you change it from draft to in review, fine, but it can't be draft and in review. Theme, though, and this is all customizable, but theme in our little imaginary universe, we could have a proposal that's about education and about poverty. And so the marketing material for that thing would be labeled with both metadata. And so it turns up when I search for education, but if I had put in poverty, none of these would show up. This one would, and anything else that had that poverty theme would show up. So that's the key filters, kind of cool. Again, all this is about like finding your stuff quickly. And I'll add, again, even these clicks, the page loads, take longer than you want them to, but once you get the views that work for you, if you bookmark them, then you just go, you don't click around much because you're right away going to what you want. So the example I gave was, let's say that that we had an intern for the summer that was just working on Ford Foundation stuff. They were the Ford Foundation intern. Well, they might have a view that just sorts for Ford Foundation, and that's all that they want. So they bookmark that. It's not a view that anybody else is using, but they're using. By the way, when you create views, you can check a box that says this is a personal view or it's a view that anybody else can share. There's one more thing that we're still doing the good things. I'm getting the challenges in a second. But you also have these drop downs. So I changed funder 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 literally minutes before this demonstration to the ones that you see like Gates and so forth. And it hasn't, some of them have caught up and some of them haven't. Within an hour they'll all be caught up. But anyway, so that's too bad for my demo purposes. But I can choose these and then it will filter, or I can do ascending and descending and therefore basically modify on the fly my view. All of these things are filtering within this library. You remember the advanced search slide I'm not going to demonstrate it because we don't really have a demo site large enough to do that, but as I mentioned in the advanced search, one of the nice things about advanced search is that it searches across all sites. It doesn't have to, but it can, and that's powerful for it. Okay, all right, so now metadata friction. So I think what I wanted to show first, if I can remember, is I wanted to show a document in Word. So I'm going to choose a blank document here, and I'm going to use Microsoft's, I don't know why they did this, but they did. So I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but you type equals lorem, open close parentheses, it makes all this nonsense. Okay, so now I am going to save this document to my SharePoint library. So I go to File, Save As. So far we're very familiar. I have my OneDrive for Business folder at the top, but then I have my sites. And if I hadn't used the demo library before, it wouldn't be in this list, but I can go all the way down to the Community IT's things at the bottom and then basically browse my way to it. That would be a lot of clicks, but it works. But if it's a library that I've used recently, it's in order of most use and use. So I'm going to save to my demo library. And now here I have my Word documents that are in my demo library. There's also, as we saw just a moment ago, PDFs and Excel. This is what you expect from Word. And I think I'd saved this already with this name, so I'm going to give it a new name so I don't have to worry about overwriting. All right, so now I'm going to save this. Notice, by the way, that you may not have noticed, or maybe you have, but Word has stock, like nothing to do with SharePoint per se, but Word has metadata And this is a brand new document, so the author has been automatically populated by the fact that it knows I'm Steve Longenecker. There's no tags, there's no title. It has the fact that I'm naming it. It's interesting that there's a distinction in Microsoft's world between name, file name, and the document title and the subject. So this is tags that would apply, you know, in a sort of file server mode. No one uses them that I'm aware of. Actually, I met someone last week at a client presentation who uses them and loves it. So I told him he's way ahead of the game as far as SharePoint goes. Anyway, we're going to save this now. So it's saving directly to the cloud. And now it asks me what content type, and this is what we would expect. So the default is a demo library doc. And I just got a little message from Johan that it's 5 p.m., so I need to speed this up. And I will invite people, not that they need my permission, but if you drop off now because you want to go home, I will not be offended. I wouldn't have been offended anyway, but you know, I'll speed it up, and you always have the recording to come back to. But stick with us if you want to. So I'm saying, okay, here's the first challenge of the day. Oh no, the file cannot be saved because some properties are missing or invalid. What this has to do with the fact is that if you save to the proposals library, you don't have to make any metadata required, but if you don't make metadata required, people may not use metadata. So there's a balance. If you make every last metadata required, sometimes people are confronted with a situation where they really honestly don't have a term that fits. They really want to leave it blank. They need to save it to this library, but there's no term for that metadata field that fits. But if it's important that, you know, you have to, you know, maybe there's no, you don't have to put a theme for every single thing, but you definitely have to indicate whether this is a draft or in review, or you know, something like that, and we're requiring it. Well, I have not mentioned yet what to do with that, so I have to. This is clicks. All right. So just wait. Oh, here they come. So funder, I have to put something there. It's starred. So I'm going to. The Ford Foundation is what I can always think of, and there it is. And it's the status. I'm going to say in review, and suggestions in review. This is helpful, not too long. Okay, so there we go. Now, interesting, this is another, I think, design flaw. It's confusing, I think. I think these title tags, comments, all this stuff should be separated. These are Word stock metadata that has nothing to do with SharePoint. This is SharePoint library metadata. These should be separated. That, in my mind, I think it's confusing that they're not. And for some reason, they don't show me the non-required metadata, even though wouldn't it be helpful if they did? So I can type in.
And this is the difference between the Windows and this is the difference between the Windows and the Mac. For Mac, you will get a pop-up, and you will be prompted to enter the metadata instead of doing all of this, getting that error and doing all of this mumbo jumbo.
So now it's effectively saved. And sorry, if we go back to our demo library and upload it, that's there, and it's got my information, but not my theme, because for some reason that wasn't normally. There's a little bug, and again, because we put this together at the last second, but we would be able to fix that so that the theme was able to be entered on the fly like the other ones were. All right, versioning. We promised that we'd show versioning, so I wanted to open this is a very quick demo, but there's something called business case somewhere, so let me find it. Here it is. So we could, in the other view, there was a column that showed how many versions there were. This one doesn't have it, but if I click and click again and choose version history, so I have my different versions, and no one has saved any comments, but it's possible to put in a comment when you save a version for this a new time. That no one, I don't think people consider that worth the cost, but it could be. But it depends. So anyway, I can revert back to this previous version. I can delete old versions. It's all that I can view them. Just what you'd expect. I won't spend more time on that now. There was also a promise of a demo about saving an attachment from Outlook. So let me open Outlook and go to my demo folder. All right, so here's, oh, look, I got an email from myself just an hour and a half ago. It's a document I asked for. So I'm going to save this. And now here's my problem. It's not this, it's like not the, it's not the word, no, it's different, isn't it? It's like the Outlook people had a different product manager. And that's a nuisance. So what do? What I have to do is save it to a swing space. So I'm going to save it here. This is extra clicks. This would make someone annoyed. And then I go to the upload button in my library and I choose my file. It's going to show something else. It was this one, right? I think so.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
So
that was it.
So I'm going to choose that. So now I'm doing that. I can put comments in my version. This is the first version. No one does it, but you could. And this is what Johanny experiences when she saves things directly from Word 2016 for Mac, whereas I have to go to that file and jump around and find the properties and expand the properties and everything. The Mac does this, which is so much better on an upload. So here I can put the things, and I got my stars, that these are required, but the theme is not. If I don't know any funders or I'm not sure which one it is, I can choose them. If I just start typing, I get suggestions, and then I don't know what my themes are, so I'm going to choose poverty. I think I could double click too, and that would work as well. And then I'm going to check it in, and I have successfully saved an attachment from Outlook, but seems like more work than it needed to be. There are other ways to control metadata. Under the Library tab, you can click on this Quick Edit button, and then this sort of turns it into something that looks like an Excel spreadsheet. And so I can, like, for example, copy that and paste it into these two things, and I can then stop it in this list. And this one I can't change because I still have the document open. And now I will stop editing the list. That was not part of my original, so it changed this one, but this one, I shouldn't have had that open. That's my mistake. I think we're gonna stop there because we're at 10 after 5 now, and I know we want to leave time for questions. So there's lots more. I love showing stuff off about SharePoint, but that's where we're gonna stop for now.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Johanny. That was very informative and definitely kind of a great introduction. In some ways, we just sort of scratched the surface of all of the features and functionality that SharePoint offers, and just kind of did some, in very broad brushstrokes, provided some idea of the ways in which it can be used as a document management system, and really how document management is really kind of sort of a quantum leap beyond file storage and file sharing. So I do want to get to some of the questions. We've got quite a few of them. So and maybe some of these are great questions, not necessarily yes or no questions. So I'll put it out there and maybe just some quick thoughts from each of you, and I'll move on to the next question, and we'll do Q&A for about 10 minutes. Anybody who has to go, can come and check out the last 10 minutes of the recording if they want to hear their question answered or just hear what some other people were asking about. So the first one is from an organization from someone who works at an organization that's already using SharePoint, and they're in the process of rolling out a document management policy. Any advice for tagging destruction dates and how to ensure that staff do this? So it sounds like an organization that has some
records management.
Exactly, some deliberate sort of records management, probably some compliance issues that they're working with. So any advice there around destruction dates?
As far as like what people should put into the date field, I think that's obviously we don't know, but also I feel like expecting SharePoint can't really control people putting the right date in, knowing the policy and knowing what to put in. What SharePoint can do, and I think this may be the answer, I'm not sure, but it can have a date field that you metadata essentially that you call destruction date, and you require it. So basically, if you save a document to your SharePoint library and don't put that required field in it, it's not going to be available to anybody else. It'll be sort of in a checked out state until you put a date in there. It is actually, the more as I talk, I think, Johanny, it's also possible that you could have a workflow that automatically assigns a destruction date, if you're comfortable with that, like for 5 years hence, based on the date of the created date. So you can do things like that as well. And maybe that's an easier way if you have that level of consistency where I mean, it wouldn't have to be across all libraries, but like this library, it's 7 years from now. That library, it's 3 years from now, and that date sort of automatically attached to the document based on the created date or the dates that it was uploaded or whatever into SharePoint.
Yeah, there's some information management capabilities for each library, and you can control that there.
Great. Then this goes back to very early on in the presentation. You had talked about, Johanny had spoken about the need for really strong and redundant internet access. Any rules of thumb for how much bandwidth to get based on number of users, type of content that's being stored in SharePoint?
Yeah, there is actually Microsoft has a formula, and it depends on the number of users, and it has a formula that kind of has an average concurrent users and an average load kind of low bandwidth usage per page. So so it does. I mean, it's I think it's 1.6 megabytes per second per page or something like per user or something like that. So I can send that link. But I would say if you have like a cable 20, the business Comcast for Business, for example, I think that for the most part that will suffice. But it depends on the number of users, honestly.
I think it. Completely agree. I think another way of framing it as a total seat of the pants thing is if you have any complaints. I mean, not you. Everyone might have one outlier or whatever, but if you have complaints about internet slowness in general, like browsing or so on, then that needs to be corrected before you go with this. If that's not something anyone ever complains about, and it's not because they don't know better, but because in fact, if people can browse the web effectively, quote unquote effectively, whatever that, then I think SharePoint's going to work. It's basically a web browsing. So, I mean, I think numbers are better, but like you kind of know probably whether your organization's internet is fast enough for day-to-day business. If it's feeling like it's not quite, then this is just going to add to the burden. If it feels like it definitely is fast enough, I think this is probably it's going to be replacing other browsing that people do.
Yeah,
for the most part.
I did find that link, Johanny, to the it's on the support.office.com site, so I just sent that out to everyone through the chat, and that's actually it's basically an article, Network Office Planning and Performance Tuning for Office 365. It has links to calculators and other tools, so thank you for that resource, Johanny. You had mentioned kind of about halfway through the webinar our insistence really on using the browser, staying away from the Windows Explorer, and particularly problems with network places. And someone asked the question, what kind of challenges have we seen with network places? They're actually just starting their file migration process. They were just curious kind of what specific issues and problems we've experienced with network places.
Network places.
I'm not sure what network places.
Yeah, I don't.
Like my network places. Basically, like you can sync up a SharePoint shared document library. You can add it. Like if you go into Windows Explorer, I'm thinking of Windows 10. No, I'm thinking of Windows 7 maybe. There's a My Network Places, so you can add in shared document libraries there.
You mean as a map drive?
Is it like a WebDAV kind of thing?
Right.
Is that
Kind of
what
like
what it's using?
I
It
clearly
might be
like
using
the two of you are
WebDAV.
so you're like what's the Windows Explorer?
Well,
Yeah,
let me
WebDAV. It's WebDAV.
let
The
yeah.
person who asked the
So
question clarified it. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so we have historically had enough trouble with WebDAV not working when people need it to, that we've sort of been bitten a couple times, and so now we're quite shy. That said, that whole Outlook thing I showed everybody, like I've worked around it by mapping my library with WebDAV because I feel like I'm an IT professional and I'm going to just fix it every time it breaks. And it does break. It breaks with some, basically every time I reboot or anything, I have to do I have to log back in again. But if people are willing to sort of go through that process, I'll find, I cannot give it to you so you can chat it out right now, Johan, but I can find sort of the how-to on that, and I kind of like it. So I still have my screen shared, so I'll show my.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Steve, that it's very important to note that you mentioned it breaks and you can fix it, right? You can fix it, but most of the users, I think, I wouldn't actually recommend, mapping it, because if it breaks and then you have it's going to create more problems. And
yeah, I think that's right. So here I am leading you down the path of negative consequences, but it can be done. At the end of the day, I certainly was not a believer in SharePoint at all, and using the browser seemed like a dead end to me. But I worked with the community IT pilot. I used it, and now I spend except for like this, I use for saving attachments from Outlook, but I do not use this as my way of accessing files. I use the browser because, for one thing, I can't sort by active projects with this. I mean, this is just not as powerful as the browser is. So I do think that you sort of need to go in, take SharePoint's design paradigm for what it's worth, and not try to sort of shoehorn it into the old paradigm, because I think that's going to end up causing headaches.
Yeah. I mean, in the same way that the file server is very limited, the Windows Explorer interface is also very limited. Yeah.
That's right.
And there was another question more about sort of the help desk that Microsoft provides as part of Office 365, and particularly contacting them with regards to SharePoint-related support, and expressing, to be frank, some frustrations with working with the Office 365 help desk. So, any tips for the kinds of issues that make sense to contact the help desk about, and kind of more broadly, like what are some of the best ways of providing support, for using SharePoint?
That's definitely Johanny's question, because she does a lot of the technical work on our implementations. What do you think, Johanny?
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft Service Desk. You submit a service request through your portal, and it takes a day definitely to answer. So I think their Service Desk is mostly for when you're designing, creating a new library and something happens and the design is not. So I think that's submitting a ticket for those type of things is great. But if you have more of a question of, how do I create this view, or why do I get this, how do I get this metadata or this term, or how can I change this and merge that? Definitely Microsoft is not good at that, and the response time will be it will be very frustrating actually to do that. So I don't know. I mean, that's hard. I would if I would
We've
just,
learned it by doing tons and tons of reading and Googling and people's blog posts,
yeah, or
but it's taken us a long
yeah,
time to
or
get that experience. So
right, or
it is a
if
tough
you
nut to
right,
crack.
if you actually build your your SharePoint in-house, more than likely, there's kind of a SharePoint admin. So it would be good when you're actually getting into the design phase to have all this a governance plan in place so that you can actually, define those roles and responsibility and who's doing what. If you have a vendor out there, you also want to have that governance plan before they actually depart, because you want to know, okay, if this thing breaks, who am I contacting? That's why I'm pausing. And in terms of community IT, for we after launching SharePoint, after 3 weeks, we're actually going back to the users and have kind of a Q&A session to show these things. And we're trying to have like a regular check-in and all of those things, and the governance plans that talk about all of this and who's responsible for what. That's kind of my best answer to that question.
It sounds like in general the Microsoft's help desk for Office 365 and SharePoint is around the technical availability and functioning of the
Right.
system. And so if there's a glitch or a bug or an error, by all means contact them and they'll try to fix it and escalate it to their engineers. But they're not really there to help with how to set up and use the system. And that's something that, organizations, in the same way that they're not really going to help you with using your email, or figuring out the best way to attach a document or so on. I mean, you could call them and ask them the question and keep them on the line, but it might not be the best experience.
It's not efficient.
It's not efficient. That needs to kind of fall within your IT support function. However, whether that's outsourced or an in-house department or an accidental techie, however that gets, however that role gets filled in the organization.
Could be community IT.
There you go. That's what I advise for.
Okay, so I think, and then there was a couple other questions related to sort of the interaction between SharePoint and Outlook. I think you covered that by and large.
There is duplication. If that's the point of confusion, then there just has to be, you just have to admit that. And like a lot of things in Microsoft, but they're like the shared calendars. Isn't that a public folder? Can you have a public folder shared calendar, or can I share my personal calendar? Yes, yes. So there's definitely some duplication where there's some question about which is the best way, and it probably depends on how much SharePoint is used.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made the comment a few times, Steve, that it seems like Outlook and SharePoint are completely different products.
Right.
Teams is probably an understatement. They're probably like different giant office parks in Redmond, on the other side of a lake from each other.
They see each other at the Christmas party.
Right, and so they each have their own task list and different way of doing things. So I think the broad question that I would ask is, and I think you could apply the same sort of understanding to OneDrive and how OneDrive fits into all of this. Like any sort of basic rules of thumb for probably better to use Outlook for these types of tasks, probably better to use SharePoint for this purpose, probably better to use OneDrive for that purpose. And maybe we'll make that the last question and close it out there. And like I said before, we're going to have a couple more webinars on SharePoint, so there's definitely more to come. And definitely let us know if there's specific topics you want to hear about. But we'll end it on that note. So just curious from each of you, kind of, when do you use Outlook, when do you use SharePoint, when do you use OneDrive?
Go for it, Steve.
Well, I think we just talked about the Outlook and the SharePoint, that there's some redundancy. I don't know that I have strong feelings about which is better, although I would say that Microsoft has historically tried to put an end to Outlook Exchange public folders, and I do think that they're invested in the SharePoint model for like a shared calendars working. And I think if you're investing in a SharePoint site, putting some shared calendars there is not really hard to do, and so why not do it there? You can still have them appear in Outlook. Outlook does integrate with shared calendars in SharePoint quite well. It doesn't really actually look any different to the end user. As far as OneDrive for Business and SharePoint, they're built. I think they both have SQL backends in that cloud somewhere, and they very much have, there's a lot of similarities between them. I think there was a question in the registration people did. They were invited to ask questions about whether like deploying OneDrive ahead of SharePoint is a good way to prepare people for SharePoint. I would say not, because OneDrive, while it's Office 360, it's a file storage place in Office 365's cloud, and it appears in a browser, the similarities start getting sparse after that. I mean, there's no metadata, there's no enterprise management of permissions. It's very much there is sharing allowed, but it's very ad hoc, and it's very driven by individuals, so it's much more of a grassroots kind of a thing. SharePoint, though, is designed by the enterprise for the enterprise, and so that's where you get to say, you know what, we're going to require that you enter the funder for this document. You cannot just save the document and not enter the funder, and that kind of control I think is important whenever you're operating at scale. I think OneDrive for Business is fine for ad hoc sharing among a few people. I think OneDrive for Business could actually be the only file sharing platform for an organization that had 4 people in it. But as soon as you get up to scale, you start needing to have those controls, or at least this is my opinion, or you're going to start having trouble finding documents when you want them, discovering documents. It's just trickier because you don't have the advantages of metadata, but and each person sort of is following their own rules for how they're organizing their own OneDrive. So I don't think it hurts the effort with SharePoint. It's possible if there's if you don't really have that much, if you have a culture where people don't listen to IT, they ask for you to do things, but everyone ignores IT all the time, you might want to delay OneDrive until SharePoint's adopted, because otherwise people might just keep using OneDrive after SharePoint gets rolled out, if OneDrive's already in place. But like a community IT, I mean, we don't have SharePoint libraries for everything, so OneDrive is used with some frequency, but as we add SharePoint libraries, I don't have concerns that people won't use them. I think once they're there, people will use them, but that's our culture, to sort of follow what's asked from our own internal governance around IT. So it depends on your on your culture, but in general, I think they're different enough that as long as that's sort of spelled out for people, OneDrive is for personal use, and ad hoc sharing when there's not a SharePoint library, that's more appropriate.
Right, and I would add to that, Steve, that also you have, with SharePoint, you have a centralized way of, a centralized console, an admin center where you can actually go and, right now we have great reports, who's accessing what file, what type of permissions are assigned, while in OneDrive, you share your stuff with other people, and I don't, other than purchasing a third-party tool, just using the Office 365 platform, there's no way for me to know what documents you're sharing with who. And if you have 1,000 documents in your OneDrive, it's even going to be hard for you or the users to see who is, who are you sharing with, and all of these things. So yeah, the metadata, and then you have the same folder structure and permission management. It's a nightmare.
In 5 years, maybe the two products collapse and everyone uses Dell for everything, but that's certainly not where we're going. All right.
You're pinning your hopes on machine learning, so.
It's, when your expectations are as low as mine were, and it's like just a shock that it actually works when it works, it is incredible.
The future is bots. You're going to have a digital assistant, and you're just going to say, what do I need to look at right now? And they'll bring it to you.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Thank you both so much. Thank you, everyone who's still in attendance. This was a marathon session, and in some ways we
Thank you.
scratch the surface. So we look forward to seeing you all back here next month. And Johanny, I look forward to seeing you again next month, and we'll do another webinar.
All right.
All right.
See you.
Great.
All right.
Good night.
All right. Good night, everyone.